Michael Shane Bargo Jr. should be sentenced to death. There are some crimes committed by minors that are so horrendous, so depraved, and so sickening that the court has no choice but to impose the death penalty. Take Dexter Johnson, who confessed to attacking and killing his victims, or Michael Bargo, who murdered a 15-year-old, burned the body, placed the remains in a paint bucket, and dumped them in a nearby quarry. What makes these cases even more chilling is that sometimes these teenage criminals show absolutely no remorse. In this video, we'll witness some of the most shocking reactions to sentencing from these kids, reactions you'll never forget. If you're curious about the characters we're about to talk about, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and share this video so everyone can learn about them. Let's start with the first character. The twisted case took place in 2006, when 19-year-old Dexter Johnson and 4 of his friends decided to go on a robbery spree. On the morning of June 18th, they armed themselves with shotguns and handguns, roaming around in search of victims. When they came across Maria Apar and her boyfriend Hingo sitting in their car, the group held them at gunpoint and forced them inside. They drove the couple to a secluded area, where Dexter assaulted Maria and tormented both victims before executing them with gunshots to the head. All of this for just $25 in cash and $25 on their credit card. When the case went to trial, the details were so horrific that the jury didn't take long to convict Dexter of murder. The judge sentenced him to death. Upon hearing the verdict, Dexter was shocked and collapsed into his chair. However, this was where the case took a complicated turn. Dexter's legal team argued that he should not be executed due to an intellectual disability, claiming his IQ fell below the threshold and that he struggled to process basic instructions. They presented new evidence highlighting changes in medical standards for determining intellectual disability, which ultimately led to federal court intervention. The court sent the case back to the lower court for a reassessment of the claims. Some experts who had previously testified against Dexter's intellectual disability claim changed their stance. However, the prosecution did not back down, arguing that Dexter was fully aware of his actions and deserved the death penalty. The case is now stalled as the court reviews the arguments. Regardless of the outcome, the victims' families can at least find some solace in knowing that Dexter will spend the rest of his life behind bars. In 2011, Michael Bargo was only 18 years old when he became the ringleader of one of the most gruesome murders. The case began when he and his group lured 15-year-old Seth Jackson to a house in Summerfield, Florida. Seth thought he was meeting familiar faces, but instead, he walked into a nightmare. The group ambushed and brutally beat him before Bargo shot him. However, they didn't stop there. They continued torturing him before executing him with a gunshot to the head. Afterward, they burned his body, placed the remains in a paint bucket, and dumped it into a nearby rock quarry. For this brutal crime, Bargo was sentenced to death in 2013 after the jury convicted him of first-degree murder. Although the jury voted 10-2 in favor of the death penalty, the lack of unanimity led to years of appeals. In 2017, the Florida Supreme Court ruled that Bargo deserved a new sentencing trial because the jury had not reached a unanimous decision. By 2021, Bargo faced resentencing, and this time, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty. Despite knowing this outcome was inevitable, Bargo continued to argue for his innocence, claiming there was evidence proving he was not guilty. Before sentencing, Bargo attempted to convince the court of his innocence, calling the entire trial a circus and blaming the judge if he were to be executed. Meanwhile, Seth's family continued to endure the pain of losing their son in such a brutal manner. Now, 29 years old, Bargo remains on death row. This case has also raised questions about Florida's death penalty laws, particularly the changes in sentencing rules. Previously, a simple majority vote of 7-5 was enough to recommend a death sentence, but stricter requirements have since been implemented. In 2011, in St. Petersburg, Florida, police officer David Crawford was murdered, and the one responsible was 16-year-old Nicholas Lindsay. The case began when Crawford, a 25-year veteran of the force, responded to a call about a car burglary. When he approached Lindsay, a suspect, the situation quickly turned deadly. Lindsay, armed with a gun he had purchased for $140, suddenly fired 5 shots at Crawford without any warning. Crawford died instantly, holding only a notepad. Shortly after, Lindsay was arrested and confessed to the crime, but what was most shocking was that his mother, Deneen Sweat, was the one who urged him to turn himself in. Lindsay was charged with first-degree murder and, despite being only 16, was tried as an adult in 2012. He was sentenced to life without parole, as Florida had a tough stance on juvenile offenders. However, in 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that mandatory life sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional. As a result, Lindsay's case was reviewed, and in 2013, he was resentenced to life in prison. Despite this, Lindsay showed no remorse. He even smiled upon hearing his sentence, seemingly unfazed by the consequences of his actions. In 2014, Florida passed a new law requiring a minimum sentence of 40 years for juveniles convicted of first-degree murder. During the next sentencing hearing, Lindsay's defense team argued that he had tried to change, earning his GED in prison and taking classes. However, the prosecutors pointed out that Lindsay continued to violate prison rules and displayed violent behavior. The judge saw no change in him, and in 2016, Lindsay was sentenced to life in prison for the 3rd time. Lindsay's smile when hearing his sentence led Amanda, the daughter of Officer Crawford, to call him a monster for his lack of remorse. Though heartbreaking, the Crawford family finally found relief, knowing justice had been served. On a cold evening on December 11, 2019, 18-year-old Tessa Maize was attacked and killed in Morningside Park, New York City. Tessa, a student at Barnard College, had a passion for journalism, played bass in her band, and was full of energy. She had her whole life ahead of her. That night, while she was in the park enjoying a moment alone, 3 teenagers, Ron Weaver, 16, Z Davis, 13, and Luciano Lewis, 14, approached her. These kids had no reason to be in the park at that hour, but they had one goal: robbery. Rashon Weaver, the ringleader of the group, kicked Tessa in the back, causing her to lose balance, then demanded her money. When Tessa resisted, things quickly turned violent. Weaver pulled out a knife and stabbed her multiple times in the chest. Despite fighting back with all her strength, she couldn't stop the brutal attack. Meanwhile, Luciano Lewis held her in a chokehold, while Davis stood nearby watching. After assaulting Tessa, the group fled, leaving her wounded and alone in the park. Security footage captured Tessa's final moments as she struggled to climb the stairs, bleeding heavily, unable to call for help, before collapsing near a security booth. She didn't survive. The investigation moved quickly, and within weeks, all 3 teenagers were arrested. Davis, the youngest, confessed and was sentenced to 18 months in a juvenile facility. Luciano Lewis pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and first-degree robbery, and was sentenced to 9 years to life in prison. Weaver, the ringleader, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, first-degree robbery, and second-degree robbery, and received a 14-year prison sentence. Throughout the trial, there were glimpses of remorse in Lewis's eyes, but no amount of regret could undo the past. Tessa's family continues to live with the unbearable pain of losing their daughter, a void in their hearts that will never be filled. If you feel shivers down your spine and fear after hearing about the crimes committed by these criminals, leave a comment with the number 1. If not, leave a comment with the number 0. Now, let's move on to the next names. Nehemiah Griego grew up in a small town in New Mexico, where his family life was filled with constant tension. His parents, John and Sarah, frequently engaged in intense arguments, turning their home into a suffocating space with no escape. From an early age, Nehemiah exhibited troubling signs, with sudden bursts of anger that became increasingly severe. By the time he was 10, his rage escalated beyond outbursts. He became violent, attacking classmates and even teachers. Social services were aware of his situation, but failed to intervene in time, allowing everything to spiral out of control. In January 2013, Nehemiah committed an unthinkable act. First, he killed his mother while she was sleeping, then shot his father when he arrived home. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, he went on to murder his 3 younger siblings, including a baby who was just 2 years old. The next morning, he called a friend and casually recounted what he had done. The friend immediately alerted the police, and when officers arrived, they were met with a nightmarish crime scene. Even the most seasoned officers were left shocked by the sheer brutality of what they witnessed. The trial garnered widespread attention. Prosecutors played interrogation footage showing Nehemiah speaking to the police with complete indifference, devoid of any emotion. The defense argued that his traumatic childhood played a role in his actions, but the jury still found him guilty and sentenced him to life in prison. When the verdict was read, Nehemiah did not shed a tear, show remorse, or react. His face remained expressionless. This case was not only shocking due to its brutality, but also raised questions about the missed opportunities within the system that could have prevented such a tragedy. Dant Wright, a heartless criminal, sparked outrage when he mocked the victim's family right in the courtroom. On July 24th at the Washoe County Court in Michigan, Judge David S. Swartz presided over the sentencing of 17-year-old Dant Wright, who had pleaded guilty to fatally shooting high school student Jordan CLE on October 4, 2016. Wright, along with 2 other teens, Jamarius Ellison and Delino Gracie, attempted to rob Jordan of his clothes and shoes in exchange for drugs, and in the process, Wright took his life. During the trial, Jordan's mother, Karen CLE, broke down in tears as she spoke about the pain of losing her son, saying she would never get to see him go to prom, celebrate the holidays, or even hear his voice again. But the cruelest part was that Wright, the very person who took her son's life, sat there grinning and shaking his head as if it meant nothing. Wright's lack of remorse forced Judge Swartz to pause the proceedings and issue a stern warning. He said, "Watching you sit there smiling as if this isn't a big deal, I really want to say that I won't accept this plea deal. If you were convicted of felony murder, you'd spend the rest of your life in prison and die there." The courtroom fell silent at his words. After a brief discussion, Prosecutor John V. consulted with the CLE family about whether they wanted to move forward with the plea deal or take the case to trial. In the end, they chose to accept the deal to bring the case to a close. Wright was sentenced to 23 to 50 years in prison for armed robbery, second-degree murder, and conspiracy to commit armed robbery, along with an additional 2 years for unlawful firearm use. Thanks to the plea agreement, he avoided more severe charges, including open murder and possible links to a 2015 gang-related shooting in Ypsilanti. Wright's lawyer, David Goldstein, attempted to explain that Wright's smile and headshake were due to fear, not indifference. But it was hard to believe this, given that Wright showed no remorse whatsoever. When asked if he had anything to say, Wright responded apathetically, "I want to tell you that I'll be home soon. I'll stay. I love my family." After the sentencing, Wright's mother, Antoinette Carter, stood up to defend her son, claiming that his mental health issues had been overlooked. However, it seemed she was more upset about losing her son to the prison system than showing any sympathy for the CLE family. It was a tragic situation, but what was most heartbreaking was the complete lack of remorse from Wright and his family. And that's the most shocking juvenile crime stories of all time. If you're scared by the unbelievable reactions of these teenagers to the death penalty and feel sympathy for the innocent victims, don't forget to leave a like, comment, and share this video so everyone can learn about it. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting videos. See you in the next one.